Welcome to Propaganda Loves You, the show that asks and answers the question, where did disinformation come from anyway? I'm your host for this week, Kodie, joined by my co-hosts, Arthur and Joe.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
This will be our first episode on the global disinformation war. So it's kind of like the higher level overview of the different people playing in this across the globe. Before we get into that, we did talk about our fact-checking game that we wanted to play. So let me pull that up.
Is this going to be like 80% me?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like, we could do different, I don't know, rules for this in the future and how we want to do it. And we can even make points or something. I don't know. But let me explain kind of what I did first. I initially tried to do this in ChatGPT. And this is kind of goes into what we'll talk about in a second as far as like how we do research, it plays into it. But ChatGPT did not work for this. I tried multiple times. I don't know if it's just because the 4.0 model has definitely had a retrograde over the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've noticed that, Arthur. But
Yeah, I've read that
yeah.
people are saying that it's more prone to these mistakes and that they don't know why.
Yeah, it was strange. Like I kept trying to run it through with the exact same, well, I was modifying the prompts I was using and created an agent for it, but it would only pick up the same 9 statements every single time I would do it. After multiple attempts, I couldn't figure out what was going on there. So then I switched over to Gemini, which is Google's version of their AI large language model, which is probably the smartest one out there right now, I would say. What I did was just basically built in a custom prompt for this, which has it go through the transcript. So I took our conversation transcript from the last episode, episode 9, not the portion where we actually did like the democracy conversation at the end, Arthur, that you led, but just the first 2. So it was like when we were just doing our weekly updates and talking about the Pope and then going into like those 2 clips from Stephen Miller and Pam Bondi. What I asked it to do was come back and go line by line through that and review for what looked like factual claims or assertions, and then fact check each one of those claims and come back with one of 3 categories, either factually accurate, partially accurate / needs clarification, or factually inaccurate. And so from episode 9, just those 2 portions that I talked about, it pulled out 28, what it's calling factual claims that we asserted during our conversation. And so now the question is to both of you, out of those 28 claims, how many do you think were factually accurate versus partially accurate versus inaccurate? And bonus points if you can call out which ones were inaccurate. But we'll start with the first 3, factually accurate versus partially versus inaccurate.
So there were 28 altogether claims?
28 that it pulled out. I did tell it like for like the little things, like if it's like, oh, the temperature, or I think one of the claims was something about the weather. It was like, ignore that sort of stuff.
It's raining.
It's like, so it's, yeah, exactly.
I honestly have no idea how to call it. Like it could go any way. So I was just going to do an even split and say like 9 of each somehow. I don't know.
Okay.
That's pretty good. Okay. I'm gonna try to say that hopefully we're hitting like 70% truth at least. And so maybe like, 20 of them are true.
Okay.
And then split the difference between the partially and the false.
Okay. So that'd be like, if we're saying 20 true,
and then 4.
Yeah. All right. So of the 28 claims, so 19 were considered factually accurate.
Nice. Wow. That's pretty good. Okay.
Yeah. That's pretty close. Needs clarification or partial accuracy, we had 7. And then factually inaccurate, we had 2 claims.
Hey, that's pretty good for some, learning.
Not terrible.
Yeah, big boys, big feelings, mostly accurate.
And I'd rather have them in the middle than be, inaccurate. We just need to provide more information.
Totally. So, with that, really quick, do you guys have any guesses on what the factually inaccurate claims were?
No, I feel like I'm drawing a blank on any claims whatsoever that any of us made. Like I can't recall a single claim. I think I said something about Stephen Miller doing indoctrination instead of education. And I feel pretty solid about that one. So I don't know if that counts as a claim in the language model's eyes.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll read through some of these in just a second. But Arthur, any
No,
thoughts?
I'm drawing a
Claire?
blank too, but I feel like I feel like it's gonna be something I said for
That
sure.
California population
clear.
statistic
Yeah,
like haunting you.
exactly.
Yeah. Actually, so when I was running the one on the episode 8, it did keep pulling out the California one. Like it like for some reason it could get off this. No, but so for episode 9, the 2 claims that are considered factually inaccurate is one from me, and that was when I said he, referring to the Pope, wasn't even on the polymarket betting, like his name wasn't even on the list. And so our fact checker said that I was wrong about that, and he was considered a dark horse candidate, but not a front runner on polymarket on the day of the election. So
Interesting.
he was discussed as a papable or popable, candidate, I guess, in the media. I don't know.
Capable.
But definitely a lower market odds for him, for sure. And then the second claim, Joe, I thought this was funny that it pulled it out, but it was the claim that On Tyranny Book Club episode will drop on May 15th next Thursday. So this is what it read back to me. It said May 15th, 2025 is a Thursday. However, as our analysis is being conducted on this Wednesday, next Thursday would actually refer to May 22nd. So just to give an idea of like how it's looking at this. But yeah, I think we corrected it during the episode.
Interesting.
Well, I think both of those are like nothing burgers. So
Yeah, they were pretty little ones. So the 7, I'll just go through these quicker, but there were 7 that were clarified as partially inaccurate, and it's actually funny. It mostly pulled out when I was reading, like from either the Influence Watch or from the Capital
Research
Center. Yeah. So it did pull out a couple things as part of that conversation as partially inaccurate. One of them was that while I was reading it from the CRC or from the Influence Watch, I said that the American Sunlight Project was founded in 2024. The fact-checking bot basically said that Influence Watch's website doesn't make this claim. However, American Sunlight Project's own website states it was launched in 2023. So little fact check on that website that we were reading from. And then the next one, it gives a little bit more detail. I think what I said was Nina Jankowicz was very shortly involved in the federal government and the Disinformation Task Force under Department of Homeland Security and was quickly shut down. So this was marked as partially inaccurate because I think it just needed more clarification. So what this came back with was basically Nina Jankowicz was appointed to the executive director of the Disinformation Governance Board in April of 2022. Its work was paused in May of 2022, and she resigned about 3 weeks after her role became widely public. The Disinformation Governance Board was terminated in August of 2022. So it took my comments as accurate, but, and also me saying task force instead of the actual name of Disinformation Governance Board, trying to give more context to what's being said there. Another one was around the 501(c) not disclosing their funds. And that part of the conversation, it said, while it doesn't list all their specific donors, major forces are typically available on Form 990, like you said there, Joe. However, they can be obscured through foundations or trusts, just like you said. Right. So it pulled out that initial comment, but didn't actually, since it's going line by line, it doesn't have the context of you correcting that right below. So it's interesting. It's interesting.
I think,
and I'll send this to you guys, and maybe we'll even include kind of like this readout in the show notes of just like how this is kind of like pulling some of these different things out. The last one that I want to mention, this was also in the partially correct. Money doesn't exist in that society, referring to Star Trek. and so what it said was,
are capitalists. I forgot.
That's literally what it said. It said it's widely accepted tenet that Star Trek lore regarding the internal workings of the United Federation of Planets, particularly of Earth. Characters frequently state that there's no longer use of money and work is for self-betterment and the common good. However, outside of the Federation or in dealings with other species, like the Ferengi, currency or gold-pressed latinum is still used. So largely accurate within the context of the core Federation. So interesting, right? But yeah. So, I'll drop this to you guys. Kind of interesting. I think it seems like it's working fairly well, but, if anyone listening, notices something and, doesn't think it got caught by the fact checker or just feels like, maybe it could be something else interesting or we don't have the context, go on Reddit. We post every single episode on there. You can just put like a little discussion or jump underneath, add comments, whatever you feel like, or bother us on Blue Sky. Either one sounds great.
I like the fact checking, and I think it's really cool. Some really nice ideas too, like it would help clarify for people if we slowed down and we named the actual agency, and it's a really good tool. It's pretty
Yeah, we'll do that at the beginning of every episode. Hopefully it'll be quick, go through it. But yeah, you guys can also play along. It did, as a factually accurate claim, Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer. Yeah, 2018 album, Damn.
Pulitzer Kenny, let's go.
Any updates, any weekly updates you guys want to talk about real quick? Anything either personal life or news that you want to relay to anyone that might be listening?
I saw earlier this week a call from 5051, the group around organizing some of these protests, that they were actually calling for de-escalation trainers or training, and they'll actually train people if you're interested. I think it puts people's minds at ease when there are some people officially handling and managing the actual protest and making sure that you have resources there to go to, or somebody that you can go to. It can help ease a lot of people's minds. So anyway, if anybody wants to become a de-escalation person for, 5051, they are looking for people and they will train you 100% free.
So is it like they want to train people to go to protests and be like de-escalators between the protesters and like the police?
They talk about on their website here, I can pull it up because I saw they had a nice infographic actually for this. But I think a lot of it is around definitely nonviolence, teaching nonviolence. It looks like they use a site called mobilize.us, and it's a company called Move On, and they do some training videos and things here.
When I was on Facebook, I signed a lot of Move On petitions for different things. I remember that. Maybe that's how they got started.
I guess here it says the core concept is to teach participants how to recognize and modulate tension in real time. They teach the practice of listening, radical listening, and empathy. They encourage participants to identify and disrupt adversarial mindsets. Maybe I can just send the infographic and we can have that up or something.
What it kind of sounded like was nonviolent communication, which is like you might see in VC sometimes. When I did my meditation teacher training stuff, we had like a whole module on nonviolent communication, learning how to ask open-ended questions, ask about people's experiences. Yeah, just a way to get them to talk about their feelings and process them in a healthy way, and just being a curious, open, non-judgmental audience for that energy to get released. I don't know. It's a pretty common, everybody should have these skills. Everybody should learn how to talk in a non-violent and empathetic way. So great that they're doing this training for free.
That would be great. Yes, 5051 is looking for volunteers to fill safety roles to help ensure safety at protests. These roles include de-escalators to help prevent and reduce tensions of conflict, medics in the case of health emergencies, and ushers to help maintain structure and assist protesters. No experience needed for de-escalators or ushers. We'll train you. So I'll send the nice QR code too.
Joe, anything from you this week?
I got jury summons.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I've been living here for 5 years now. It's the first time. I don't know. For some reason, I thought I was immune. I thought it would never happen, but I got summoned. So I got to go show up for jury duty.
Do you have to go to Annapolis for that, or is that like the county?
No, it's a Prince George's County thing. Probably like a 20, 25. It's not a bad commute or anything, but still, it's like 7:30 a.m. Show up at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Here we go. I mean, I'm excited to do my civic duty. I'm so excited to do my civic duty.
Yeah. I think they give you $5 for lunch too, or it might have gone up. Maybe it's like $6.
It's like a big or not. I can't remember the dollar menu now. Like a McDouble and a half now. I don't know what the price is, but are they still doing sandwiches for $1?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure you get like the little apple pie for $1.99, and I think that's.
No, we should cut all that. No free ads for McDonald's. Fuck them.
Fair point. Yeah. We'll just bleep out who we're talking about there, or just.
Does still do their breakfast dollar menu?
Oh, cool. I don't really have any major updates for this week other than I joined a group that does some bike rides on actual pedal bike rides on Mondays. It's just like a little local thing, meet up and go and bike for like 15, 20 miles and then go to a bar pretty much. So I did that for the first time on Monday and crashed my bike. So that's good.
Oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
You have boo-boos?
Yeah, I'm good.
You okay? Yes.
I do. I got these.
On the hands.
My hands.
Oh no.
And I got a big one on my knee. My knee took the brunt of it.
Oh, man.
But yeah.
That's childhood for you. Scraped knees
It
on
really
bikes.
is. It reminded me a lot of it, actually. It's like, I don't think I've ridden a bike for more than like, I don't know, 5 miles in quite some time. So for this episode this week, like we said, for the main segment, we'll go into disinformation, kind of talk about the players there, really focused on kind of like Russia in the first one. And then, this will probably be 2 parts, I think, to get through kind of like the major players and give everyone kind of that baseline understanding. But before we do that, a topic for this week, we wanted to talk through almost like a meta topic. We don't have clips or anything or EOs that we want to talk about, but I've gotten a few questions from some of the people that listen about like, how do the 3 of us know each other? And that's probably a good question that we should answer early on. But so yeah, we're just going to give a little bit of information about the show today and then jump into the main segment. So yeah, just to start, how do we know each other?
Bound by blood.
Just that's it. That's all we're going to tell people.
We all have a blood pact.
I mean, I just imagine you guys at a campfire cutting your hands and then slapping them together. Now it's forever.
Oh yeah, like the Arnold.
Yeah.
That was pretty much how it went.
I think so. Yeah, that's how I remember it anyway. Yeah. But so I guess Joe and I have known each other, how long is that? Like it was like 2013,
No,
2012,
dude.
something like that.
You're forgetting now.
What's that?
Station.
Oh shit.
And we met. It was
Yeah.
like end of 08, beginning of 09. We were in Marine Corps job training. We were in different programs. We had slightly different job MOSs or whatever.
That's right.
But we were both on base at the same time. I remember you were the married guy. You got to live off base, like,
Wow.
just living it up. Everybody else is stuck in the barracks. You get to live off base. So that was my first memory of you. Oh, he gets to live off base. He's that
good times. And then we ended up at the same place in Maryland as well for the next, I don't know, well, since basically then, pretty much. So been quite a while. And then after we kind of like separated from the military, still have had annual camping trips or whatnot, stayed in touch, and then decided to start this.
Yeah.
And yeah,
we actually had the same real
I don't
estate
know.
agent too. We bought houses like half a mile down the road from each other for several years. We were pretty close like that. But yeah, same core group of Marine Corps buddies. Still do hiking trips and everything. Mostly annually. It skips a year. I mean, I'm kind of lazy about it and bad at scheduling, so sometimes I miss a trip. But yeah, in general, we keep it going.
And then Arthur, how did we meet?
How did
this
we
happen?
meet? That's a good question. When did we meet?
I have no
Yeah,
idea.
exactly.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
When?
Yeah. I don't know. I tell people that I just say brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Because who knows, us millennials and whatever. But I've been dating Cheyenne for 9 years maybe, and engaged and getting married. And then Joe, we met via this project. Brought us together.
Yeah. We still haven't met IRL, but hopefully we can have like a, podcast retreat or something. Where we all are in the same room recording for some stuff and just hanging out and everything. Looking forward to that. But no, it's been short but great so far. I love it. I've always felt like an extended member of the Olbert family, and now I feel like you're just another member of this family that I've been lucky enough to be close with all these years. So yeah, happy to be part of the same weird family together.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So wanted to give kind of an update to everyone. We mentioned a few episodes back that we haven't really done any advertising for the show. So anything like it's all word of mouth, right? Like we're handing the show out or telling friends, family about it, and then propagating from there. And so far, We've had over 170 unique listeners in the show, and where all this information is coming from is from our hosting service. Actually pulls back a lot of analytics on like how many plays it's had and everything like that. So we've had over 170 unique listeners that have played at least, some portion of one of our episodes. We've had over 300 downloads. This is from, when we started at the beginning of April till now. We have had downloads in 7 different countries. Any guesses on the top 3 countries? I'll give you one for free.
Okay, but yeah, tell me.
Nothing.
Oh, no.
It's the U.S.
No, not the U.S. The U.S. was easy.
I feel like Canada's got to be one.
You want me to answer?
How about like UK? I'm just trying to think where English is prevalent.
Yeah.
And
that's a good
somebody would have
question.
to be kind of knowledgeable of, well, maybe they might have an interest in like politics of the U.S.
It's a good
No.
it's a good direction to go.
160 of our 170 listeners are Russian spies or something like that.
Oh, totally. Russia's got to be in there for sure.
Yeah. So the number one, like I mentioned, US with like over 300 downloads. Number 2 is Mexico. We don't have a ton of downloads in Mexico. We got 10. So I don't know if that's like, that's one person listening to all of our episodes, I think. But then number 3 is Russia with just 4 downloads. So
They're all Tim
Yeah.
Pool or whoever you said.
yeah.
Wow.
And then for the United States, just as a little bit of a interesting thing, we've got 17 states that are listening right now. Top 5. Number 1's New York, then Maryland, Virginia, California, and Washington. So not too many surprises there,
Wait,
considering where we're all
California
located.
and Washington, but not Oregon?
Wow.
Oregon is number 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That-
Yeah.
There's a guy who has maybe had one. It was called like Eugene's Realtor Podcast or something, and he just put like a owl over his fence with like an ad, and so everybody had to drive by. So, and I was
Nice.
thinking, maybe if I just paint the house.
Do it. You got to get like one of those skylights. 'Cause
Yeah,
it's really foggy
Yeah.
there, right? So you can just launch that. Oh,
Like the
man.
Batman thing?
Yeah, exactly.
that'd be sick.
Well, we're gonna do flyers as soon as the website's up. We'll put a bunch of posters on there, and then whoever listens can print them out if they want to, and hang them up in a coffee shop or something. But yeah, it's just a little bit of statistics on the show, like I mentioned. So we'll start doing some advertising. We'll kind of give updates every so often as it grows if people are interested in kind of how we're doing. I've had that question quite a few times, so wanted to give an update. So in the interest of transparency, and I think we mentioned this previously, we want to talk a little bit about kind of how we do the research for some of these episodes. And I'll use this episode, or the main segment that you're about to listen to, as my example of like kind of how I went through the process of like putting the information together. And, we do use, or at least I use, a couple different AI models actually for a lot of the initial research. I know that some people have concerns with AI use in general. I'm kind of in the camp that's more like, if you use it as a tool and don't put a ton of faith into the response you're getting until you verified it, that's really the way that I think you should use it at the moment. You can't just trust it blindly, but it is, in my opinion, 1,000 times better as far as using just a general search engine. It gets you closer to what you're trying to look for initially, right? And it can help you with pulling out like some articles. But basically, what we did was went through, come up with the story that we want to talk about, and used ChatGPT at first to pull together a basic outline of the different articles that we would use to support the argument that we're trying to make. And then I would also fact check and run that through multiple other LLMs. So like Gemini was the one I was just talking about. Use that to review what's coming out of ChatGPT, pulling out top articles that we really want to talk about that actually bolster the argument or provide whatever insights that we think are the most relevant. And then kind of going into each one of those articles and pulling out the information that we think is trying to tell the story that we're trying to get across. So it's that's part of it. And then a lot of it, honestly, is just from like the books that we've read before the show, or like I've mentioned it multiple times on here, like How to Lose the Information War. So there's a lot of knowledge from that too. So that's kind of like what we've been doing. So, or at least what I've been doing for these episodes, using those to pull out the information. Just the initial seed research really is what I'm using that for, to get to what we actually present in the show.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, when you're talking about whatever models we're using too, you're really narrowing it to peer-reviewed studies and trusted sources in academic journals. A lot of the time we go to like original documents, kind of going to the actual budget PDF on some .gov website, things like that, so that it's not just, theorizing opinions, but, we're actually getting, that concrete information.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, if you haven't used AI or the large language models from any of the big companies, we have fake ads on the show talking about truth AI and stuff like that, because it can absolutely be influenced. Joe, you've said it in multiple episodes, like who owns it, who controls it, right? So you need to make sure when you're using those tools that you're also providing the parameters, just like Arthur said, like, hey, I want to limit it to these types of sources, like credentialed sources or from these different institutes that you trust. Also, like one of the things that I've got in there is like basically a blacklist of sources that are known to not be valid. And so I leave those in there as saying, like, we can't pull from this from a factual standpoint, but we can pull from these sources from like a learning standpoint or like identifying, disinformation type thing. So yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. Make sure that it's actually pulling that information from a legitimate source and not just hallucinating it or just making it up, because AI will do that for sure. So make sure that all the claims are backed up by valid sources. It's pretty basic there, but yeah.
I kind of wonder if like you put up one of these AI models, like if it just had access to Facebook and you were like, tell me about World War II. Like what's going to happen?
I mean, you could test it. You just scrape like whatever you want and throw it into like a custom knowledge source and tell it to only use that.
Facebook.
Just see what it comes back with. Yeah. But I mean, speaking of AI for just a second, it's like there's a lot online too about Grok, which is like X AI. So it's like Elon Musk's AI, and the fact that Grok frequently will debunk certain, talking points or just, things that are more prevalent in the magosphere, which is interesting just because it's like, I think one of the things that came back was I'm not going to go into that because I don't know all the details off the top of my head. So it's just going to flag it as wrong.
See, it's already doing what we want it to.
I know.
It's already checking us.
I know. Yeah. It was like just something online where it was basically mentioning that it made it seem like the engineers working on X tried to influence how it would respond, but it has a weight towards legitimate sources, and that's why it only goes towards factual things, right? Like, so, yeah, conflicts with the worldview sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe this could be a bigger topic. At some point later in the show, we could do an episode about AI or whatever. Because like I'm kind of like vaguely aware of a lot of the AI tools, but I don't make any use of them regularly myself. Like if I'm doing a Google search, I'll look at what the AI overview says before I keep scrolling and look at other things. But I don't like go out of my way to use ChatGPT or like I've never figured out how to organize the prompts and to do all that setup and stuff. I know people have really like put a lot of thought into how they use these tools, and I think some of those capabilities and the different ways you can be efficient with your time are really interesting and useful. So I'm not like a Luddite that wants to smash all the AI technology or anything, but it's also just interesting as a writing teacher because I can tell sort of how the language sounds in different assignments I get from my students. I can tell when when it all of a sudden doesn't quite sound like how they normally write. It's different. You can kind of tell in the way that the language is put together, something's off. So I end up having a lot of conversations about like primary and secondary sources, like you guys were just getting into, and like making sure you understand what context is necessary for different arguments. Like, my main worry, I guess, with AI and writing in particular is that we'll not engage in that process of source work as meaningfully as they used to. And they'll just sort of trust the model to be ethical and accurate with its sources. But as you were saying, like sometimes it'll just literally make something up to fill in a gap. But that's how history works. People do that too. And we got to point all that stuff out. So, but yeah, I don't know. I just think maybe it's a fruitful topic for later in the show for us to dive into.
Yeah. And I think it can be really powerful too, right? Like if you kind of understand how to use it, and like you can go and you can learn about a ton of shit. like it's anything you're interested in. I think it can be a really good tool for the type of work that we're trying to promote when it comes to identifying disinformation and understanding motivations of people. It can help with that for sure. But like you said, Joe, like you can't just accept what is written. So yeah, it would be good. I agree.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of know too the usage. I've read on, I don't know, just like I've read online a lot of people's different takes on like the impacts of ChatGPT from like an environmental perspective. So we could dig into that too and see what does hidden search do.
Yeah, because I've seen some say that it's like a huge environmental impact, and then the counter argument is like, I think it was water, right?
Yeah.
Was the one that I was looking at. It takes an insane amount of water, and then the counter argument was, yeah, that water's recycled. Like it's using the same water over and over, so it's not like it's actually taking like a gallon of water per search. I'm making up that number just
for our fact checker listening.
Yeah, but yeah, so like that would be great. Like I don't know the answer to that. Like I don't know like what is true in that scenario, right? Like if it's actually doing all the recycling. And I'm sure it's a little bit different for every data center, but yeah, that would be a great one to dig into and get the details on.
And I'm sure it's a large problem for, if Facebook uses this ChatGPT to do some sort of learning model. Maybe they have their own language model, but some company is using it and they're using X amount of power versus hitting it for like a writing paper.
Yeah. There's the ethics for the individual, and there's also just like the large scale material conditions of how things get produced. This is technology in general. I feel like we kind of assume that the internet, all these streaming services and all these devices we use are just electronic and everything's sort of in the air, in the cloud. And it's hard to really remember that these things have a material basis in reality. Like there are actual minerals that need to be mined from different places in the world. They could do an episode on, the hellscape that is the Democratic Republic of Congo and how companies are exploiting actual slave labor to make a lot of this technology. And there's also things like in the States, like data centers, how are the servers kept cool? Where's all that power getting drawn from? Dasani is already sucking up all the water and selling it back to us. What else are companies doing with water in wasteful ways that we're taken for granted? So yeah, all of that is
it
just
sounded
kind of,
really good. It sounds really good.
Arthur and I, we connect on the vegetarian topic a lot, and there's like a lot of the same individual level and large scale level analysis to do, like as a consumer, what you eat, but also like, something like the fact checker will get this, but I think there's like 12 companies that are responsible for like 70% of carbon emissions. And so there's like that difference, and like they're making us feel guilty about our individual choices while these 12 companies get away with everything.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about that? Anyway, opening up a huge can of worms here.
What I was thinking about was, have you guys watched all of The Good Place? Have you seen that show?
Yeah, I think so.
It was like one of the later seasons, one of the later episodes when it's like the guy that was trying, like, got closest to figuring out what the actual system was, and like even he couldn't get into The Good Place just because of like essentially what you're talking about, Joe. Like everything is broken under like this current, capitalist world that we're living in. It's impossible to live ethically.
Yeah. What's her name? The actress Maya Rudolph from SNL. She was like God or whatever in the show. And she like did a trial period in Hawaii. And she was like, oh my God, it's so hard to be good. You know how much cruelty goes into producing a tomato? It's crazy.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. Teaching history used to be exhausting. So many competing perspectives, uncomfortable questions, emotional fallout. It was chaos.
And that changed? How?
We adopted the Heritage Vault curriculum from Veritas Media Group. Now the content is clean, aligned, and completely free of ideological friction. No protests, no debates, just straight-line facts that arrived at approved conclusions.
Isn't that limiting?
Sure, but my students are calm, and no one's crying during the civil rights module. It's made classroom management a dream.
Use of Heritage Vault may reduce critical thinking, empathy retention, and intellectual pluralism. Loyalty increases statistically with repeated exposure.
Welcome to the main segment for the week. I'm Kodie, and this week we're going to be kicking off our disinformation episodes with the intent of basically we want to kind of provide like a high-level overview of what's going on in the world of disinformation globally. Before we can get into all those kind of like more detailed conversations, we wanted to give like a high-level view of what that looks like and explain a few concepts using specific case studies that have actually taken place. Just for information's sake, over these next two episodes, we're not going to be talking specifically about the United States and disinformation. We're going to have a bunch of episodes where we dig into that. This is really more focused on some of the bigger players outside the US, outside of our borders, that are operating disinformation campaigns that can target US citizens, just everyday citizens. We'll be talking about 4 of the more prominent individual countries. That's going to be Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea over the next couple of episodes. So let's kind of get rolling into that. So, each of these governments has developed their own disinformation playbook. Some use troll farms, others weaponize diplomacy, and some are just spamming Facebook with conspiracy. At the end of the day, they're all trying to manipulate reality in some form in order to serve their geopolitical goals. Before we get into the country-specific operations, I wanted to clarify something that we touched on in the first episode, or I think it was our propaganda episode, where we talked about propaganda and explained some terms there. Specifically, I wanted to revisit the difference between misinformation versus disinformation. Yeah, so I think when we did that episode, I think I said something along the lines of like, if it starts as a disinformation campaign, even if someone unknowingly spreads it, we're still going to be calling that whole thing, disinformation. And that's generally still going to be true for how we treat it on this show. But there is some nuance that I wanted to call out, right? So the academic distinction between misinformation, disinformation, I think I mentioned this, but misinformation is basically false or misleading information that's shared without the intent to deceive. So like an example of this, really a lot of examples for this come out of the medical side of things, right? Like if you grew up and you always heard from your grandmother that if you put garlic in your socks at night, you'll feel better in the morning. I'm just making that up. I have no idea if that's an actual thing that people do. But if that was a thing you were told your whole life, and who knows, that might be true. I have no idea. I should probably Google my example before I use it. But if that's something you've always been told and you share that online and it turns out that's not true, then that's probably the most innocent form of misinformation you can think of. It's genuinely something that you believed was true and was not necessarily originally formatted to deceive or to cause any type of chaos. Then okay, that could be misinformation. That's not really what we're focused on. Disinformation, that is specifically it's false or manipulated content that's deliberately created and distributed to deceive or manipulate. So it's really the intent there that is the big difference here. Like it's created specifically to deceive people. Also want to mention, right, just because misinformation, even if it does start innocently, it doesn't mean it can't become weaponized later by those that want to, especially if it's something related to anything that's divisive, then it can definitely be tapped into and amplified by disinformation, people that would normally promote disinformation, right? So just wanted to kind of put that out there and make sure that that was clear, kind of how we're looking at disinformation versus how that's actually handled academically. Any thoughts on that or anything you guys want to hit on with those?
I was just going to think of another category of, I don't know if it'd be misinformation or disinformation, but the kind of thing is a lie, but you choose to believe it anyway because it's funny. Like if you know a story about J.D. Vance and a couch, I choose to believe it because it's funny, not because it matters or means anything. So I don't know what category that fits into, but it's just another thing.
Yeah. If you acknowledge it and you're like, I know it's not true, but I'm still going to talk about it. Like, I don't know. I think that's more all in good fun at some point. I mean, if you're saying that you know what it is, right? What we talked about before is really where, either misinformation is being weaponized or, individuals might be spreading disinformation they don't know is disinformation, right? Then that's where people get confused over the definitions and kind of they get merged. But yeah, for simplicity's sake on this show, we're going to be talking about disinformation or things that started as disinformation. So, and that really brings us to the term, disinformation itself. So it's pretty widely understood that it's an English translation from the word disinformatia. It's spelled DEZINFORMATSIYA in English, obviously not Cyrillic. But the term actually reports back to like the early Soviet era. And some, historians are actually crediting Stalin with institutionalizing it in 1923 when intelligence agencies began using kind of like deceptive content as part of their foreign operations. But kind of funny enough around itself, like the word and the origin of the word for disinformation is kind of disinformation adjacent. So there's a lot of deliberate myth making around whether it was coined in English to sound Western or if it evolved organically from early Soviet doctrine. But what's not really in doubt is that it gained prominence during the Cold War, especially through like the KGB's so-called like active measures, the KGB being, Soviet Union's intelligence apparatus at the time. And so I would just make one note here. Like, if you want to have a really good understanding of active measures and disinformation from the Cold War Soviet era timeframe and kind of how that operates closest to its original definition, I do recommend a book called Disinformation. It's from former Lieutenant General Jan, I'm going to butcher this name. So it's a Jan Mihai Pacepa. So he was basically he was the chief of Romania Foreign Intelligence Service and was a direct advisor to the Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu during the Cold War. And he was actually the highest level defector from the Soviet bloc during that time that defected to the US. The majority of the book, like the whole, I think first 2/3 of that book, are actually a firsthand accounting of different Soviet disinformation campaigns or operations that Pacepa was directly involved in, just based off of his position or had firsthand knowledge of prior to his defection. The later portions of the book are kind of weird. It's mainly speculation around Barack Obama and how the U.S. was going to be a socialist country or was going down the road of socialism. And so, like, I'd love to explore that more because, like, it's a really interesting juxtaposition between, like, calling out all of these disinformation tactics and campaigns to, like, almost promoting the same disinformation that the right had been promoting at that time, almost a fear of socialism. But the reason I still bring this up is because that first portion of the book where it's firsthand knowledge of these different operations and how Pacepa actually talks about them and his experience with those lines up really well with a lot of other research into how Russia conducts disinformation operations. So there's some independent fact checking that backs up portions of his story. If you're interested in that, first half of the book, first 3/4 of the book, really good. I would say finish it anyway, but take your own whatever you draw from that last portion there. So it started, or it came to prominence in the Cold War through active measures. These were really structured campaigns, not just like random rumors that were put out, but they were structured campaigns designed to discredit opponents, stir unrest in Western societies, and reshape public opinion abroad. And, we're talking about the Cold War era and how disinformation was really big at that point in time. After the Soviet Union fell, there's kind of a lull there. But also thinking back to that Cold War era, this is kind of where Putin grew up. He was part of the KGB during that time, during the fall of the Soviet Union. So absolutely understood how these operations worked. And then we had a long pause there where these weren't necessarily occurring when it was like the Yeltsin years, or at least it wasn't as aggressive. And then, going into 2016, and as the internet became more prevalent, like it opened up this entire new, basically, front for this type of information warfare to occur. So like it evolved from basically just grainy leaflets and fake newspapers into deep fakes, troll bots, fake diplomat accounts that are like tweeting things that never occurred but look exactly the same. The tools are way more advanced. The targets can be very specific. Like they can target specific groups of people on the internet that they want to influence, get it into your feed through Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Telegram, whatever it is, right? Like it's an entire new field for them to kind of go into. So in this episode, we're going to break down the tactics and motives of the big four. Like I mentioned, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, each with their own type of signature. We're going to stick to the verified cases. We're going to stick to the ones that have reporting from legit sources, not looking at legends or rumors, but we're also going to look at kind of at the end, how are democracies basically pushing back against this? How do fact checkers actually work against these sort of things? Talk a little bit about digital literacy programs. With that, any thoughts before we jump into our first one?
I wish that your knowledge here had been available to me before I signed up for Facebook in 2010. Just knowing it, it's really scary when you put it all out there. And then you have domestic actors as well who are invading the algorithm. If I had a child, she would not be on social media ever. This is horrible.
I had a quick clarifying question. That's the word.
Mm-hmm.
So like the word target is kind of like a metaphor in the sentence, right? People are targeted with like a bullet from a gun, and then we're sort of transferring this targeting. I'm just wondering what they're being targeted with, like what the word target does for you there when you're explaining how
Yeah,
disinformation works?
that's a really good question. So when I'm saying target, what I mean is like, okay, if you go online, you're going to have a signature online, right? A digital signature. Every site that you go to, everything you interact with is going to have some sort of cookie-based memory of you or your device, right? Because where we are right now in the United States is, if you've heard the term of surveillance capitalism, that's very much the state that we're in when it comes to all of the different tech companies that offer services to you for free. If you think about Facebook, right? I just get to create this account and keep in contact with all these people, and it's great, right? Like, I don't have to pay anything. But the reason you don't have to pay anything is because those companies are collecting insane amounts of information about you and your devices that you're using that enable them to sell advertisements to specific groups that they want to buy things, right? So, like, if I was creating a market for, I don't know, we'll just say a really cool coffee brand or something that I wanted to market to a specific group of people, they can do that through advertising. Like, I'm only interested in males between the age of, 16 to 35, and I want them to be right leaning. I want them to go on certain websites or get information from certain locations. And this is the group that I'm going to target with my message. So that's really what I'm talking about. Like, when they're going online, looking for very specific groups or that they can push their message to based off of like all the information that's pulled off our devices from different companies.
What's scary is like geofencing in that. Like you could pick two completely different universities, like one Florida State and one like California State, and you could have the same company doing two different ads that just targets that exact location. And
oh yeah, yeah. And actually, we're gonna talk about a couple examples today of the types of groups that were targeted with information, right? With these messages that they wanted to get out. I think that the whole actually surveillance capitalism. I'm pretty sure, Arthur, do we have an episode planned for that? I think we do, or at least it's adjacent to the technology episode that I think we're gonna do.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we'll probably go into like a lot of detail on how that works and what you're actually signing up for when you agree to whatever cookie on whatever website, and how the US has almost zero protections for that compared to a place like the EU that actually has regulations around personal data and whatnot.
And like as an aside, like just do you remember reading about that Disney, like some guy got into an accident or something and he wanted to sue Disney, but it turned out 6 years ago on Disney Plus, he signed up a waiver that gave away all of his rights to sue Disney.
It's like straight up a Black Mirror episode.
Yeah. And then they get the court like tried in Anaheim or wherever Disney is. And like the court that Disney's been picking for 80 years is like, oh, well, that's obviously not right. And then just a whole episode on Disney. That'll get us canceled.
Yeah. That's the thing. We can't upset the mouse and the Trump administration. That's just too many people. Okay, so we're going to jump into our first kind of country overview here. And since we just talked about disinformation and kind of the origination of where that came from, we're actually going to start with Russia, right? So, it's probably the country that is most often thought of when people think of disinformation, if they're familiar with it. That makes sense for reasons that we just outlined. The term disinformation comes from Soviet Russia, but is also a major tactic that Russia's used since the Cold War and even before, right? And so as a precursor to kind of like the Russia section and going into this, I want to read the opening of a report from the RAND Corporation. This is from July 2016, written by Christopher Paul and Miriam Matthews. This is just the opening of this report. We're going to have this linked in the show notes as well if you want to read through the entire thing. But I think it captures this in a way that's better than I can write it out. So since 2008 incursion into Georgia, if not before that, there's been a remarkable evolution in Russia's approach to propaganda. This new approach was on full display during the 2014 annexation of Crimean Peninsula, and it continues to be demonstrated in support of ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Syria, and in pursuit of nefarious and long-term goals in Russia's near abroad and against NATO allies. In some ways, the current Russian approach to propaganda builds on Soviet Cold War era techniques, with an emphasis on obfuscation and on getting targets to act in the interest of the propagandist without realizing that they have done so. In other ways, it is completely new and driven by the characteristics of the contemporary information environment. Russia has taken advantage of technology and available media in ways that would have been inconceivable during the Cold War. Its tools and channels now include the internet, social media, and the evolving landscape of professional amateur journalism and media outlets. We characterize the contemporary Russian model for propaganda as the firehose of falsehood because of two of its distinctive features: high numbers of channels and messages, and a shameless willingness to disseminate partial truths or outright fictions. In the words of one observer, new Russian propaganda entertains, confuses, and overwhelms the audience.
That's how I feel with the news cycle. So, job complete.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Just put out so much information that it's impossible to, fact check all of this, and it continues to make the narrative change every day, right? Like, it's hard to keep up if there's always constant new things coming out, and you have to try and keep up with those things, right? That's definitely a part of it.
Yeah, it's like we're not talking about Signalgate.
Right.
Yeah, that's already gone.
Yeah. And I was just going to say it's a great reminder to like use your emotional experiences as teachers for yourself. So like when you're using devices and engaging with the news and starting to feel overwhelmed and drained and exhausted, to like ask, is that intentional on someone else's part? Is someone intentionally making me feel this way with this technology? What's my relationship to it? Maybe I should change something about how I'm using it.
So when you think of modern Russian disinformation, if you've been following along with that or paying attention during the 2016 election cycle, you probably know about the IRA, and that's not the Irish Republican Army. That's the Internet Research Agency, which was the Russian troll farm that kind of became famous during the 2016 election. And so I'm going to read from a different report here that provides kind of a brief overview of what occurred in 2016. This report comes from the European Parliamentary Research Service. Before I read the report, though, I just want to give a quick background on EPRS. This comes from their website. So the European Parliamentary Research Service provides comprehensive research and analytical support to the members of the European Parliament, its parliamentary committees, and European Parliament as a whole. The EPRS philosophy is to provide independent, objective, and authoritative information. We aim to provide a comprehensive research and analysis capacity of the kind to be found in many parliamentary democracies worldwide. So these guys, they do research for the EU. So it's pretty credible source.
Can I just add a quick contextual thing just about that? Because it reminds me that like every government kind of has one of those. Like we have our own in the US, the Congressional Research Service, and you can go to their website and look up reports that they produce for congressional members. And it's not that these bodies are not like rigorous or scientific or anything, but it is that they're institutionally affiliated. And so it's okay to use them with the understanding that you keep the context of their like inherent financial bias in mind, like they work for a particular governmental body. But that said, they do have like great rigorous processes and the reports are good. And so as long as you keep that just from a professor point of view, like knowing the bias of your sources, just using sources, but keeping their bias in mind at the same time.
Are you saying, just to clarify, is it that the institutions changed with whatever party is in charge during that time? Like if now maybe would the Congressional Research Service have more right-leaning stuff?
I don't know for certain, but I'd say it probably depends on the situation and like maybe project specific, like who is literally funding the project you're working on. Right. So maybe it's even like bill dependent, like a certain party is working on a bill they want to pass. And so they're trying to produce research that supports it. And so they call on the Congressional Research Service to produce these reports. And then, so it's sort of like, I don't know, it's with that in mind. It's not that they might not be rigorous or go against it or whatever, but they are sort of financially incentivized in one way.
Always good advice, Joe. Okay, so yeah, just to give a little context again about this article, we mentioned who it's from, but this was from February of 2018. So again, we're using kind of like dated articles here. So, some things may have changed. I don't see any update date for this one. So it looks like this is the original from 2018. This is going to kind of look at the 2016 election and give kind of a high level overview of some of the different things that took place during the 2016 election. This article was written by Martin Russell. Okay, so the title here is the Kremlin's troll factory. So Kremlin media such as Sputnik and RT, which stands for Russia Today, weighed in on the election debate, showing a clear pro-Trump, anti-Clinton bias. However, most Russian activity was covert through social media accounts purporting to come from U.S. citizens, news portals, and organizations, but in fact operated by Russian trolls. According to the statements made by social media companies to the U.S. Congress inquiries into the subject, there were 50,258 linked automated Twitter accounts, Russian-linked automated Twitter accounts that generated around 2.1 million tweets. Facebook found 470 accounts. 22 of these matched directly with the Twitter accounts, which produced a total of 80,000 posts. And YouTube, Google suspects around 18 channels that uploaded around 43 hours of political videos. So, social media companies have traced many of these accounts to a shadowy organization from St. Petersburg, set up in 2013 as the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, dubbed by the press as the Kremlin's troll factory. Officially closed in 2016, it remains active in late 2016. They moved to bigger offices. This is just kind of giving some background on where they are right now, but this was, again, 2018. For example, right now, this article is still talking about Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was if you remember, at one point during the war, there was not a militia, but
it's like a special ops unit or something, right?
But they're like contractors, but there's a specific word for, why am I blanking on this word? Mercenaries.
Mercenaries.
Yeah, so like he basically had like this big mercenary group, but he also ran the IRA, right? But if you remember during the, I can't remember exactly when this was, but he basically led this column of mercenaries like to Moscow. Like it looked like they were going to try and take over Moscow. Anyway, that didn't happen, and he was thrown out of a helicopter, I think, a while, or his helicopter mysteriously went down a while later. But anyway, no, that's just an aside here. It's just the life of a Russian oligarch, I guess.
Like those Boeing whistleblowers.
Oh, yeah. Actually, let me pause. Yeah, any thoughts just from the amount? I mean, it's kind of hard to draw anything from that when you don't know like the total volume for Facebook or whatnot, but just that, like, does that surprise you guys at all? Like that 50,000 Russian linked automated Twitter accounts or anything like that? This is back in 2016 too.
Yeah, now they just bought the whole platform. It's pretty, that's a lot. It's that they're going to inundate all of us. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, 50,000 in 2016. Who knows how many it is now at this point? From more and more sources, probably, too.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. Is your republic feeling cluttered, weighed down by dusty amendments and outdated rights? Then you'll love Project America 2050 from the Liberty Institute.
Project 2050? Isn't that a plan to fundamentally rewrite?
Think of it as spring cleaning for the Constitution. We're tidying up, streamlining burdensome clauses, optimizing citizen obligations, and replacing those creaky old checks and balances with sleek, efficient directives.
But eliminating entire articles?
Look, we're simply refactoring governance for the 21st century. It sparks joy, well, for us. Project America 2050, tidying up democracy one inconvenient right at a time.
Participation in Project America 2050 may result in significant changes to your perceived rights and role as a citizen. All changes are final.
All right, so I'm just going to, I'll read this part. Most of the tweets were not actually directly linked to the election campaign, but promoted right-wing views on race relations, Muslim extremism, migration, and gun control, likely to appeal to Trump supporters. So I'm going to stop here because I think, like, we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second, but the big thing that kind of comes out of a lot of this messaging and a lot of this disinformation that's coming from these Kremlin trolls, it's not obviously like pro-Trump or like obviously anti-Clinton for the most part. Mostly it focuses just on issues that are divisive, right? Its purpose is to make Americans hate each other and have distrust in the government. Like that's the main driver for a lot of this disinformation. So it specifically targets, again, this is where we get into those groups that are being specifically targeted here with this information. So I'm going to skip forward just a little bit to kind of get into this. So among the most successful troll accounts on Twitter were those of Trump supporter Jenna Abrams with over 70,000 followers and of Islamophobe South Lone Star with 17,000 followers. They're self-described as a proud Texan and American patriot. Kremlin trolls also set up numerous discussion groups on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, such as Heart of Texas, Being Patriotic, and Army of Jesus. However, some trolls also took the opposite side of the debate in groups such as Blacktivist and Black Matters USA, LGBT United, and United Muslims for America. The aim, in the words of U.S. Senator Richard Burr, appears to have been to foment conflict and tear apart our society. Presumably in doing so, they calculated that a more heated debate would favor Donald Trump as the more outspoken candidate. So, I don't know. The Blacktivist thing, I think, was a pretty big news story when that one came out. But yeah, it's basically playing both sides of this and trying to pit them against each other. So if you think about when you go online and you see some extreme comments, like if you lean more towards the left end of the spectrum and you happen to go to our conservative just to see what people are saying over there, understand what's going on. It could be a legitimate person, totally could be. Just as equally, it could be a Russian troll or someone else that's trying to foment dissent and trying to make things worse by just turning up the pressure, turning up the heat in online spaces, hoping that translates to, the real world. So let me pause. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, just be intentional with your communication online, just as you would in real life. If I don't know, I'm thinking if I'm walking around town square or something and there's some people just screaming about this or that issue, and then there are other people just sort of calmly talking about it, I'm going to go talk to the calm people. I'm not going to engage with the crazy people, even if they have the same opinion that they're expressing in a healthy way or a literally psychotic way. I'm going to avoid the people experiencing psychosis. So yeah, same thing online. Don't engage with people when you see that the conversation is not worth having. Save your energy. Be wise about it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think Snyder too, it talks about just going out and being involved in other stuff and having that sense of community and how important that is, because that's where reality ought to be based.
And that's great advice.
I hope that when I do go to our conservative and I see those comments, I really hope that sometimes they are trolls, because sometimes I read them and they're just so out there.
Yeah. Well, if everyone goes into an online conversation just assuming that those crazy comments are likely just inflammatory, just to be inflammatory, and just ignores them, we'd be in a much better space. They always say, don't feed the trolls. It's legit. Just don't engage. Like Joe said, just don't engage with that type of rhetoric.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking the flip side now too is it's we can have that sentiment and all agree on that, but we still live in a world where Andrew Tate gets a gajillion views, and those people have enormous influence, and we're losing that persuasion war, so to speak. People are engaging with the hate and the anger. We also have to think about how to, I don't know, convince those people, to have a different kind of conversation. I don't have a good answer. I'm just thinking about how tough the reality is in relationship to how we would like it.
And I think in my thought, it comes to providing alternatives. At least that could be a part of it, right? That's partially what we're trying to do, is provide an alternative that, is still entertaining and makes people want to listen, but hopefully doesn't have the same level of vitriol, I would assume. All right. So we talked about how this kind of happened online, the different groups that they were engaging with, the different, some feedback, or not feedback, but comment from U.S. Senator appears to be foment conflict and tear society apart. Okay. So they didn't just stay online, though. I'm going to read directly again, from the article. Kremlin trolls brought conflict not only to social media, but also to the streets by orchestrating various protests. In May of 2016, an anti-Muslim rally in Houston organized by Heart of Texas clashed with a counter-protest led by United Muslims of America. 2 months later, a Blue Lives Matter rally honored officers killed by a black protester on the same day as a gathering commemorated a black man shot dead by the police. Being Patriotic attempted to organize pro-Trump rallies in 17 cities on 20 August 2017. How many of these actually went ahead is not clear. More successful was November 2016's Black Matters USA anti-Trump rally, staged a few days after Donald Trump's election victory in New York, which was attended by thousands. These events were mostly organized from Russia without any local presence. For some of its rallies, Black Matters US posed as a black rights movement in order to enlist the support of American activists. So going from just trying to push a message to actively engaging with individuals inside the United States that don't know who they're talking to. They don't know who's actually supplying this. It's like, so we talked earlier about how, I think this was the very first or second episode, we talked about how Russian-backed media was pushing certain divisive content into popular podcast shows, right? Like paying them to do that, paying lots of money. This is kind of the precursor to that, where they're getting involved with groups, building groups online and trying to create action in real life, hoping for conflict, purposely putting two groups that will, are counter groups in the same area at like protests. So yeah, it was more than just online.
It's like sad how smart it is. Putting two diametrically opposing groups together. It's like I could sing the song of like unity and solidarity, break down the walls, but it's just really, I think it's just really important to investigate and know exactly what you're getting into there. I guess that's really scary.
And so now we kind of get to the impact, at least from this report, what they thought the impact was. So this is the last portion I'm going to read of this. So after initial skepticism, social media companies have woken up to the scale of the problem. Data released by them shows that the most successful troll groups, such as Blacktivist, which had 388,000 followers on Facebook, and Heart of Texas, which had 254,000 followers on Twitter, reached substantial audiences. The @10GOP group had 115,000 followers and attracted comments from high-profile individuals such as National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. On Facebook, trolls reached 126 million users between January 2015 and August 2017. 11.4 million people as a result of seeing advertisements. I skipped over a section earlier, but they basically paid $100,000 for different advertisements in the U.S., which is a funny number because I'm pretty sure, no, I do know this. In one of his speeches to the EU, J.D. Vance basically said, if Russia can pay $100,000 for advertisements and it's a threat to your democracy, you didn't have a stable democracy. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially the message that he put across. On Twitter, election-related tweets from Russian users reached newsfeeds 455 million times. 1.4 million Twitter users interacted with such tweets for retweeting, quoting, or liking them. So the message from the social media companies on this has basically been that the Russian-produced content is actually a very, very small portion of overall content that you have on social media. They're saying it's 0.004% of total content. And the way that they're saying this, though, is they're kind of comparing it to, they're saying since it's such a small portion of the content, it would take you the equivalent of reading like 600 books or 600 hours in order to see it. But they're leaving out a lot when it comes to the algorithm, how it gets amplified. Just doing a comparison of total content is very disingenuous, in my opinion, on that.
Yeah, and like what's the usage on leading up to the weeks before election night in a swing state in a county that they know they need to win?
Yeah.
Yeah, not those details are not to be found.
Yeah.
So
I also just think the way we use social media, so much stuff just passes in front of your eyes that I'm not even really looking at half the time. I'm not reading most of what I see most of the time. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I'll linger there for a second, image, whatever. So I'm sure a lot of disinformation passes ignored. But yeah, the way they can specifically target moments and situations and populations and stuff, and just, I mean, it's just, an a la carte service that these tech companies provide. Just choose your drop-down menu of how you want to manipulate your audience. Here you go.
What's the most useful audience for you in this election? Oh, it's young males between the age of 18 and 25. Sure, we can serve ads to them. That's fine. And Joe, you mentioned that it does go into this article, or in this research article, is basically talking about like a majority of this stuff does just go under the radar, but they put out such a massive amount of it and it's amplified by bot networks. For them, it's a numbers game. It's a quantity over quality game, right? We're going to put out a ton of stuff, see what sticks, and then feed those things. Like that's kind of the thought process behind it. Actually, just going into this next section here. So this is no longer from the article, but there was another campaign that Russia had basically done around the same time that was discovered in 2019. This was called secondary infection. It was a multi-year operation that spread thousands of false stories across over 300 different platforms in tons of different languages. This is exactly that, Joe. It's just put out everything you can and then like see what grows, see what doesn't. The interesting thing about here is there's a lab that actually did some investigation into this that identified this specific secondary infection operation that took place. I'll put the link for it in the show notes as well. But it kind of breaks down how this one worked and how it was a little different from some of the other operations. They basically took burner accounts where they would create some completely fake document that is impersonating a real person. In the report, the one that shows is a tweet that looks like it's from Marco Rubio that's basically crapping on the EU.
Sounds like pretty standard Marco Rubio so far, though.
It's got to look like it can be realistic, right?
I can't believe Marco Rubio had a future after that whole water bottle.
Forgot about that. He's like responding to one of Obama's State of the Unions.
I was right after. Totally. That was.
So this is like one of the fake tweets that they actually had created, right? So burner accounts created, it's got this fake tweet. It essentially tries to seed this fake tweet into like just the into the news feed, right? And then it goes away. That burner account gets deleted, so you can't trace back where it came from. But that's their methodology, right? Drop this in, see if it starts to grow, try and amplify it with other accounts that aren't associated with that original burner account, and try to grow the story with essentially just fake documentation, things that are completely made up. So it's not even like this is kernel of truth stuff. This is all just like deep fake, not real at all. So that's a different tactic that they were using around the same time. And like I said, that I'm barely scratching the surface of that article there, but we'll attach it in that whole research into our show notes so you can read through that as well. So these two examples really just barely scratch the surface of Russian disinformation in general, right? We haven't even talked about how they use the AI generated content now, how they influenced like the 2020 or 2024 elections, their involvement in Brexit, the elections in Romania and Poland, and also in Germany. They're basically their entire information war against the West at this point. So we are going to do some more in-depth episodes just focused on that, try and fill that story out a little bit better. This is just a high level overview to kind of get started into this. So I think to close this out, on Russia, I do want to read kind of like one more section. This is actually from that RAND report that I quoted from earlier, written by Christopher Paul and Miriam Matthews. Contemporary Russian propaganda has at least two other distinctive features. It is also rapid, continuous, and repetitive, and it lacks commitment to consistency. Interestingly, several of these features run directly counter to the conventional wisdom on effective influence and communication from government or defense sources, which is traditionally emphasize the importance of truth, credibility, and avoidance of contradiction. Despite ignoring these traditional principles, Russia seems to have enjoyed some success under its contemporary propaganda model, either through more direct persuasion and influence or by engaging in obfuscation, confusion, and disruption of truthful reporting and messaging. We offer several possible explanations for the effectiveness of Russia's Firehose of falsehood. Our observations draw from a concise but not exhaustive review of the literature on influence and persuasion, as well as experimental research from the field of psychology. We explore 4 identified features of the Russian propaganda model and show how and under what circumstances each might contribute to effectiveness. So this is like kind of setting up the rest of this article that they've got here. But the part that I want to get to and end on is there's 4 distinctive features that they call out of contemporary Russian propaganda. And that's high volume and multi-channel. I mean, it's like just like we were talking about, it's continuous, putting out all this information, seeing what sticks, and putting it out on every single channel possible. Number 2 is rapid, continuous, and repetitive. It's why you see the same messaging over and over again. And like if we take that translation to more the United States current situation, it's the same reason that you are still hearing about the 2020 election and why they're continuing to push those narratives, right? You have to continue to sell the lie until it becomes the truth. It lacks commitment to objective reality, is number 3. And number 4 is it lacks commitment to any form of consistency. So not all of Russia's info ops succeeded, like we talked about before. Thankfully, many are caught and exposed by journalists, governments, and research groups. But again, the sheer volume and variety that they've got going on between trolls, hacks, fakes, bots, all these different things, it's enough to keep people a bit concerned moving into the future. And it's not going away. It's only going to get more complicated as time goes on. So that's what we've got for Russia in this episode. Any thoughts, anything we want to talk about there?
High volume, continuous, but only 0.04%. Don't worry about it.
2016, 0.04% or zero. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, just define the
I'm
election.
sure it's.
I haven't tested this, but I've heard that, like, in terms of algorithm sanity, if you block the Facebook account on your social media, the amount of ads you see drastically lowers, which kind of makes sense to me. But I just had a question about the whole overview of Russia and disinformation and everything. If you had to say, like, what's your takeaway, or your like, what's essentially your argument about Russia and disinformation for the average American? What do you want them to take away from it? What do you want them to know or understand? What's sort of the big deal about Russia and disinformation for the average person today?
Yeah, we're veering into opinion. I just want to make sure that's clear at this point. This is just, I'm not reading from any reports. I'm not, this is just my opinion. I think the big takeaway from me is, again, my opinion. I think in Putin's eyes, the Cold War never ended. When the Soviet Union collapsed, all of these tactics were originally developed and being used for the Cold War. With, Putin's rise and basically takeover of Russia, that is corresponded with the increase that we've seen in these types of operations against Western countries. It's a full-on attack on the West by trying to make groups hate each other, I guess is what I'm thinking. And so if I had to say a takeaway, when you go on the internet, there are groups out there that are trying to make you hate other people, is really what it comes down to. It's a concerted effort by this group to make that happen, right? And I'm not saying that this is Russia, the Russian people. I'm specifically talking about the Russian government and the way that they operate, right? And so I really think it's just, for me, it's just an awareness thing, right? When you're online, especially when you're interacting with people that you don't know in the real world, there's a good chance that they are, especially if you are having an emotional reaction to anything that's being said, you could likely assume that a lot of that messaging is coming from some of those disinformation operations. I don't know. There's a better way to say what I'm trying to say, Joe, but let me pause there if that made any questions come up.
No, I think I hear what you're saying about how they can cause you to feel animosity towards other people that you might not otherwise feel. At the same time, we can't, sort of wave our hand and call fake news just because it makes us angry sometimes. And what's sinister about a lot of this stuff is sometimes it is grounded in some, little pie slice of reality, something that's really going on. Sometimes it really does reflect your opinion, the thing that's making you angry. It's just doing it in an inflammatory way. For me, I'm just trying to sort of connect with the issue because, I don't know. I'd never really think about Russia and disinformation in my personal life. It's not something I worry about much. I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it or worrying about it. And I don't have any positive or negative. Well, negative. I have zero opinion about Putin other than what I've seen in the media about him and stuff. So it's not a person or a place or a government I spend a lot of time worrying about. So I'm just sort of thinking from that perspective of someone who doesn't really think about it much. What would you recommend as something that people should be aware of?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the reason that I think about this a lot, because the Russian government, not necessarily the Russian people, is at war with the U.S. And when they say they're at war with the U.S., they're not at war with just the U.S. government. They're going to war against the U.S. people. And I think that might be a distinction that a lot of people don't quite understand. The population that they're trying to influence to hate other people is just normal everyday citizens in the United States. And so it's more of an awareness thing. If you're aware of the tactics that Russia has used in the past and continues to use today, you can see the parallels of what's happening in our country right now. They've adopted a lot of these tactics. They're using the same exact thing that Russia's done. So if you understand Russian disinformation and how that works, you can apply a lot of those same lessons to what's going on in the United States.
Yeah, I think like it's kind of like Russia is, it's a potential future of ours. It's at least one future that has played out for some people, after different regime fell, and that, it can definitely happen. And I think that it's like another example of like an oligarchy billionaire class showing confusion and making everybody, separated, of course, by drawing whatever lines they can. And then the scary thing that you're pointing out to me is like it's undermining and it's like eroding these movements of social justice, like Black Lives Matter, or take like Occupy, or like some climate. We were just talking about the climate protests, but like when you put in and you infiltrate them with like fake actors, or you have like a counter protest going on at the exact same time, it's really eroding that movement. And that's just really scary to think that like a foreign power billionaire is doing that.
Because I think that the end state from, well, again, this is opinion land, not fact land. So, but I feel like the end state for Russia is more of like the balkanization of the United States, which means basically like they want to see us fall similar to how the Soviet Union fell and turned into all these different countries. That would be the ideal scenario for Russia, and probably for China as well. But really, just since we're just talking about Russia right now, because it takes the U.S. out of the equation from the global power perspective. That's what this is for them, right? That's why they're doing it. They don't want the U.S. to be the sole global superpower, basically. So it's, war. Yeah. It's war for them.
And I feel like that's already kind of happening too. Like the U.S. Since the Soviet Union fell in 1989 or so until about, well, maybe the Russia-Ukraine war started, or maybe you could point to something else, but it's not a unipolar power structure in the world anymore. It's multipolar. The United States can't act like it's the biggest, baddest force in the world. There's enough realignment elsewhere on the globe so that regardless of whether the U.S. government continues to exist in the same way it has for a while now, or it ends up in some balkanization scenario, like you said, the reality is that whoever's controlling the U.S. has to negotiate on a more level playing field now. They can't pretend like China and Russia and the whole BRICS realignment, and all these other global South organizations that are coming together and excluding sort of colonial Western powers from their group of allies. It weakens the U.S. position. And so the wise thing to do for U.S. leaders would be to recognize that reality and begin realigning yourself accordingly, and to make your own population happy. Because with all this disinformation and the internet age and all this overwhelming deluge of things coming at you every day, there is also incredible access to information, incredible real-time sharing of events. You can know what's going on around the world. You can download a Chinese social media app and see randos in China doing their silly videos and everything too. And we didn't have that 10 years ago even. And so the U.S. government has to be really careful about how heavily they play their hand. On the Trump side of the spectrum, they're being really aggressive and fascist and psychotic about it. And I think that's a strategy that's going to backfire. The general population sees through that for the most part because we have this immediate access to information. This realignment is already happening. It's not just that we might lose, if we're taking the perspective of the U.S., that we might lose the global power hierarchy. It's gone. There is no U.S. on top anymore. It's multilateral. You got to negotiate in that new world now.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow, and the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time,
stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
propaganda loves you.